A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal. Learn more at modal.com.
Hey Herman, I was looking at some of the data our housemate Daniel sent over this morning, and it really highlights a jarring contrast in how we think about our working lives these days. It feels like we are living in two completely different economic eras at the exact same time. On one hand, you have the gig economy and the tech world where people change jobs like they change their phone cases. But then you have these pockets of extreme stability that look like they are frozen in 1955. It is this weird duality where the average person is constantly refreshing their resume, while a small subculture is basically picking out their retirement watch on their first day of work.
Herman Poppleberry here, and you are spot on, Corn. It is a total paradox. If you look at the broad numbers for early 2026, the median job tenure in the United States has hit a historic low of just 3.9 years. That is the lowest we have seen since the Bureau of Labor Statistics started tracking this with modern methodology. In the private sector, it is even shorter, around 3.5 years. But if you peer into the corners of the economy, you find these lifers, people who have been in the same seat for 20, 30, or even 40 years. It is almost like a subculture of longevity that exists in total defiance of the modern hustle. We are talking about people who remember the office before it had high-speed internet, and they are still there, navigating the same hallways.
It is fascinating because we often talk about job hopping as the only way to get a raise or stay relevant, especially when we discussed the 4.6-year itch back in episode 463. Back then, we were looking at why people feel that biological urge to jump ship right around the 5-year mark. But today I want to dig into the other side of that coin. Why do these holdout industries exist? Is this extreme stability a foundation of expertise that keeps society running? Or is it just a breeding ground for institutional rot? Are we looking at the last remnants of a functional social contract? Or are we looking at a set of golden handcuffs that are actually stifling innovation?
That is the big question. And when we talk about these holdouts, we are not just talking about one specific niche. We are looking at tenured academia, the civil service, the military, the judiciary, and even utility sectors like power and water. These are the industries where the 30-year career is not just possible, it is the expected path. Daniel was asking us to look at the structural mechanisms that actually make that happen because, let us be honest, staying in one place for 3 decades does not just happen by accident in this economy. You have to build a very specific set of walls and incentives to keep someone from wandering off when a recruiter calls with a 20% raise.
Right. There has to be a very intentional design behind it. I mean, think about the judiciary or the clergy. Those are roles where we actually value the passage of time. We want a judge to have decades of experience because we equate that with wisdom and a steady hand. We do not want a disruptor on the bench who is trying to move fast and break things. But does that same logic hold up when you're talking about a middle manager in a government bureaucracy or a technician at a power plant? Is there a point where that stability stops being an asset and starts being a liability?
Well, that is where the economic definition of tenure comes in. It is essentially a form of risk sharing. The employee gives up the potential upside of the open market in exchange for the downside protection of long-term security. And one of the biggest drivers of this is what I call the 30 and out pension cliff. In many public sector and unionized roles, the entire compensation structure is backloaded. You are not just working for a salary today. You are working for a defined benefit that only crystallizes after 20 or 30 years. If you leave at year 15, you are essentially leaving hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars on the table over the course of your retirement. It creates this intense financial lock-in that overrides almost any other career motivation.
So it is essentially a set of golden handcuffs, but instead of tech company stock options that vest over 4 years, these are iron handcuffs that take 3 decades to unlock. That brings up a massive engagement challenge, though. If you are staying somewhere primarily because you cannot afford to leave, how do you keep from just coasting? We have all encountered that person in a government office who clearly checked out 10 years ago, but is just waiting for their pension to hit. They are physically present, but their spirit left the building during the second Bush administration.
And that is what researchers call the middle career valley. If you look at employee engagement data, people tend to be very excited at the start of their career because they are learning, and they often get a second wind toward the end as they prepare for their legacy or retirement. But there is this massive trough, usually between years 8 and 20, where the novelty has worn off, the promotions have slowed down, but the finish line is still too far away to see. In a gig economy, you just quit and find a new valley. In a tenure model, you have to find a way to bridge that gap without losing your mind or your productivity.
I wonder how organizations that actually do this well manage that valley. I mean, academia has a very specific mechanism for this, the sabbatical. You work for 6 years, and then you get a year off to go deep on research, travel, or just clear your head. It is a structural fix for cognitive decay. It acknowledges that the human brain is not meant to do the exact same thing for 40 years without a reset. Why do we not see more of that in the private sector? If we want people to stay for 20 years, why do we not build in these periodic release valves?
It is rare because the private sector is so focused on quarterly results and immediate capacity. If you lose a key person for a year, the short-term hit is visible on the balance sheet, while the long-term gain of preventing burnout is invisible and hard to quantify. But some of the most stable international models take a different approach. Look at the German Beamte system. These are civil servants with constitutionally protected status. It is nearly impossible to fire them, which sounds like a recipe for laziness to an American ear, but the trade-off is that they are insulated from political volatility. They can give honest, expert advice to elected officials without fearing they will lose their job if the wind blows a different way. It is a system designed for continuity over efficiency.
That is an interesting point about insulation. We often view tenure as a way to protect the individual, but in high-stakes industries, it is actually a way to protect the institution. If you're running a nuclear power plant, you do not want your head of safety to be worried about a performance review from a boss who is trying to cut costs this month. You want that person to have the security to say no, even if it is unpopular. It reminds me of our discussion in episode 425 about why old tech still rules the world. Sometimes the human equivalent of legacy code, that deep institutional memory, is what keeps the lights on. You need someone who remembers why that specific valve was installed in 1984, and why you should never, ever turn it to the left.
I love that analogy, Corn. Long-tenured employees are basically the legacy code of an organization. They know where all the bodies are buried. They know why a certain process exists even if it looks inefficient on the surface, and they provide a level of stability that you just cannot get with a workforce that turns over every 3 years. But the risk is the same as with old software. If you never update it, it becomes a bottleneck. You get institutional resistance where the answer to every new idea is, we tried that in 1998 and it did not work. It creates a culture of no that can be incredibly demoralizing for younger, more ambitious employees who are just entering the system.
And that is where the pathology starts. If the institution becomes so stable that it cannot adapt, it eventually becomes brittle. We have seen this in case studies of the Catholic Church or the United Kingdom civil service. When you have people who have been in the system for 40 years, the culture becomes so thick that even a visionary leader at the top cannot move the needle. The middle management layer just absorbs the change and waits for the leader to leave. They know they will be there long after the current CEO or prime minister is gone. It is a form of passive resistance that is almost impossible to break.
It is a fascinating tension. On one hand, you have the erosion of the Japanese salaryman model. For decades, the lifetime employment guarantee, or shushinkoyo, was the bedrock of the Japanese economy. But in 2025 and into this year, we have seen a massive shift. Toyota and other major firms are actually unwinding those guarantees because they realized they could not stay agile enough in the global electric vehicle race with a workforce that was guaranteed a job regardless of performance or changing skill sets. Over 30% of Japanese workers now say they actually prefer job mobility. They want the freedom to move where the technology is going rather than being tied to a sinking ship.
That is a huge cultural shift. It suggests that even in cultures that prize loyalty above all else, the sheer speed of technological change is making the job for life model feel more like a cage than a safety net. If your skills are not being updated, being stuck in the same company for 40 years is actually a massive career risk. If that company eventually fails or pivots, you're left with 3 decades of experience that might be hyper-specific to a dead technology. You have spent your whole life becoming an expert in something that no longer matters.
Right? It is the difference between having 20 years of experience and having 1 year of experience 20 times. To avoid that, organizations that prioritize longevity have to be obsessed with internal mobility. There was a Gallup study from last year, 2025, that showed organizations with high internal movement reported 87% lower turnover. The secret to a 30-year career is not doing the same job for 30 years. It is doing 5 or 6 different jobs within the same ecosystem. It is about creating a career lattice instead of a career ladder.
That makes a lot of sense. It allows you to have the security of a long-term employer while still getting the growth and variety of a job hopper. I think that is the middle ground that the modern gig economy has completely missed. We have traded all the stability for the illusion of freedom, but most people are just exhausted. They are constantly looking for the next thing because they have no institutional home. They are mercenaries without a cause. And while that might work when you are 25 and single, it starts to feel very precarious when you are 45 with a mortgage and kids.
And that is why I think we are seeing a bit of a resurgence in people seeking out these stable niches. In a world of generative artificial intelligence and rapid automation, a government job with a pension and a clear career ladder looks a lot more attractive than it did 10 years ago. It is almost becoming a luxury good. Stability is the new status symbol. If you can tell someone that you have a guaranteed job for the next 20 years, that is a level of wealth that a high salary at a volatile startup just cannot match.
Let us talk more about that middle career valley though, because I think that is where most people get stuck. If you are in year 12 of a 20-year path to a pension, and you are feeling that itch, what do you actually do? Organizations that succeed here seem to use rotational assignments. Instead of just giving you a promotion, they move you to a completely different department or even a different city. They force you to be a beginner again, which is the best way to spark engagement.
Right, and that serves 2 purposes. It breaks the monotony for the employee, but it also cross-pollinates the organization. It prevents those silos where one department has no idea what the other is doing. The military is actually the gold standard for this. You rarely stay in one specific role for more than 3 or 4 years. You are constantly being uprooted and forced to learn a new context, even though you are still under the umbrella of the same branch of service. That is how they keep people engaged for a 20-year career. They are essentially job hopping within the same company.
It is a forced growth model. It is interesting because it mimics the benefits of job hopping. The new environment, the new boss, the new challenges, without the terrifying downside of losing your health insurance or your retirement contributions. I wonder if private sector companies could adopt a version of this. Imagine if a big tech firm or a manufacturing giant had a formal policy where every 5 years you had to switch to a different product line. It would be chaotic at first, but the level of institutional knowledge you would build would be incredible.
Some do, but it is usually reserved for high potential leadership tracks. I think the mistake is not making it a universal expectation. If we want people to stay for the long haul, we have to treat their career like a series of chapters rather than a single long sentence. And that brings us to the motivation paradox. We often assume that people leave jobs just for more money, but the data suggests that in these holdout industries, people stay because of a sense of mission and community. They feel like they are part of something that matters.
I see that in the utility sector. If you talk to people who work for the water department or the electric grid, there is this deep pride in being the person who keeps the city running. It is a very tangible form of service. The gig economy struggles to replicate that because it is so transactional. You are just a line item on a spreadsheet, and the company is just a platform for you to sell your labor. There is no shared fate. You do not care if the company exists in 10 years, and they certainly do not care if you do.
Shared fate is the perfect phrase for it. In a long tenure organization, your success is tied to the long-term health of the institution. If you are a tenured professor, you care about the reputation of that university 20 years from now because you are still going to be there. In the private sector, most executives are gone in 4 years, so they only care about the next 16 quarters. That short-termism is the natural enemy of institutional expertise. It encourages people to strip mine the organization for short-term gains because they know they will not be around to deal with the consequences.
But we have to address the elephant in the room, which is the cost of that stability. We mentioned institutional resistance earlier, but there is also a literal financial cost. Long-tenured employees are usually the most expensive. They have maxed out their salary bands, they have the most vacation time, and their pension liabilities are growing every year. From a cold, hard efficiency standpoint, a chief financial officer might look at a LIPA and see a liability that could be replaced by two hungry 25-year-olds for half the price.
That is the trap, though. That chief financial officer is looking at the price of labor, not the value of expertise. When a 20-year veteran leaves, they take with them thousands of undocumented edge cases. They are the ones who know that if you turn that specific valve too quickly, the whole system vibrates, or that a certain client needs a specific type of communication to stay happy. Replacing that with two 25-year-olds who have to relearn everything from scratch is a massive hidden cost. It is like deleting your entire documentation library to save money on server space. You might save a few dollars on the monthly bill, but the first time something breaks, you are going to spend 10 times that amount trying to figure out how to fix it.
That is such a Herman analogy. But you're right. We saw this in the aerospace industry a few years back. There was a massive wave of retirements, and suddenly these companies realized they had forgotten how to build certain types of engines, because the knowledge was all in the heads of people who just walked out the door with a gold watch. That is the arc of deprecation we talked about in episode 425. If you do not have a mechanism to transfer that tenure-based knowledge, your institution eventually suffers from a form of digital Alzheimer's. You literally forget how to do the things that made you successful in the first place.
And that is why the most successful stable organizations are obsessive about mentorship. It is not just a nice-to-do thing, it is a survival strategy. In the judiciary, for example, the clerkship system is a formal way of passing down that institutional DNA. The senior judge is not just deciding cases, they are training the next generation of legal minds in a very intimate, hands-on way. They are ensuring that the wisdom of the past is carried forward into the future. It is a chain of expertise that spans generations.
So, if we are looking at this from a policy or management perspective, the goal should not be to bring back the 1950s job for life, where you sit at the same desk for 40 years doing the same task. That sounds like a nightmare for most modern workers. The goal should be to create a framework for long-term loyalty that is dynamic. I am looking at the Gallup 2025 data again, and it says that comprehensive engagement programs can reduce turnover by 87%. That is a staggering number. It suggests that people actually want to stay. We just give them every reason to leave. We have built a system that punishes loyalty and rewards the mercenary.
I think people are naturally risk-averse. Most people do not actually enjoy the stress of interviewing, updating their portfolio, and starting over every 3 years. They do it because they feel they have to in order to keep their head above water or to get a fair wage. If an organization can provide a path for growth, variety, and financial security, the vast majority of people will take it. The problem is that most private sector companies have broken the social contract. They laid people off the moment there was a dip in the market, so employees responded by becoming mercenaries. It is a rational response to an irrational environment.
It is a low-trust equilibrium. The employer does not trust the employee to stay, so they do not invest in them. The employee knows the employer will not protect them, so they are always looking for the exit. These holdout industries like the civil service or unionized trades are essentially the last bastions of high-trust employment. Even if the pay is lower than a tech startup, the trust is higher. And in a volatile world, trust is a very valuable currency.
And that trust translates into a different kind of productivity. When you are not worried about your job security, you can focus on the work. You can take the long view. You can suggest a project that will take 5 years to pay off because you know you will be there to see it through. That is how we got things like the Interstate Highway System or the Apollo program. Those were the products of long tenure thinking. You cannot build a moon rocket with a team that turns over every 18 months. You need people who are committed to the mission for the long haul.
It makes me wonder about the future of the career as we move deeper into this decade. With agentic artificial intelligence starting to handle more of the entry-level tasks, as we discussed in episode 639, the value of a human in the loop might actually shift toward that deep, long-term institutional oversight. We might not need 1,000 junior analysts to crunch numbers, but we will definitely need the person who has seen the system fail in 10 different ways over 20 years and knows how to steer the artificial intelligence when it hits an edge case. The lifer becomes the supervisor of the machines.
I think you are exactly right. The human role is moving from execution to judgment, and judgment is a function of experience. You cannot prompt an artificial intelligence to have 20 years of context that it was not trained on. The lifer might become the ultimate luxury in an artificial intelligence-driven economy. They are the guardians of the context. They are the ones who can look at a result and say, that does not look right based on what happened in 2012. That kind of intuition is built through years of observation and participation.
So if you are a manager listening to this, or someone trying to navigate their own career, what is the takeaway? To me, it seems like we need to stop viewing tenure as a sign of stagnation. We need to start measuring internal mobility. If your employees are staying for 10 years, but moving through 3 different roles, you have hit the jackpot. You have the stability of a veteran with the fresh eyes of a newcomer. You have someone who knows the culture but is not blinded by it.
And for the individual, the lesson is to look for those organizations that still value the long game. If you can find a place that offers sabbaticals, rotational assignments, or a clear path to mastery, that might be worth more than a 20% raise at a company that will replace you with an algorithm in 18 months. We need to start looking at our careers through the lens of buy it for life, which we touched on in episode 807. Invest in the institution that is willing to invest in you. Look for the places that have a 30-year plan, not just a 30-day plan.
It is about escaping the trap of cheap goods, but applying it to our own labor. Why sell your years to the highest bidder in the short term, if it leaves you with no foundation in the long term? I think there is a real hunger for this. I see it in the younger generation, too. They are tired of the hustle. They are tired of the constant anxiety of the gig economy. They want something that feels solid. They want to be able to say, I am a part of this, and I will be here tomorrow.
It is the vinyl paradox, corn. Just like we talked about in episode 720, why does analog survive in a digital world? Because it has a physical presence, a history, and a depth that streaming just cannot match. A long-term career is the analog version of employment. It is heavy, it takes up space, and it requires maintenance, but the sound quality is just better. It has a richness and a resonance that you just do not get with a series of short-term gigs.
That is a beautiful way to put it, although I am still a bit worried about the stagnation part. If we look at the German Beamte model again, or the judiciary, how do we ensure that the protection of the individual does not lead to the suffering of the public? I mean, if you have a judge or a high-level bureaucrat who is clearly not up to the task anymore, but they are constitutionally protected, that is a real problem for democracy. How do you maintain the standard of excellence when the threat of termination is removed?
It is a legitimate concern. The only real answer is a rigorous entry process and ongoing peer review. If you are going to give someone a job for life, you have to be incredibly selective about who gets in. You cannot have a 30-year career path for a role that has a low bar for entry. These holdout industries usually have very high barriers. You need a doctorate for tenure, you need years of service for high-level civil service, and you need a lifetime of legal excellence for the judiciary. The stability is the reward for the difficulty of the path. It is a filter that ensures only the most committed and capable people make it to the end.
So the tenure is the end of the marathon, not the beginning. That makes a lot of sense. It is a filter. If you can survive the first 10 years of that pressure, you have earned the right to the stability of the next 20. But I think we also need to be better at creating off-ramps. Not everyone who is a great researcher at 35 is going to be a great researcher at 65. We need ways for people to transition into mentorship or advisory roles without feeling like they are losing their status or their security. We need to allow people to age gracefully within the institution.
Right. The cliff should not be the only way out. We need a more gradual slope. But overall, I come away from this feeling like we have undervalued stability. We have spent the last 20 years worshiping at the altar of disruption, and we forgot that some things should not be disrupted. You do not want your heart surgeon to be a disruptor who is just trying this out for a few years before they move into venture capital. You want the person who has done 10,000 of these over 30 years. You want the person who has seen every possible complication and knows exactly what to do.
Expertise is a slow cook process. You cannot microwave it with a 3-month boot camp or a series of gig assignments. It requires the seasoning of time. And I think as we look toward the rest of 2026 and beyond, we might see a bit of a pendulum swing back toward these long tenure models, especially as the volatility of the global market continues to ramp up. People are going to be looking for anchors in the storm.
I agree. In a world of chaos, the person who has been standing in the same spot for 20 years starts to look like a hero. They are the anchor. They are the ones who provide the continuity that allows the rest of society to function. And honestly, I think Daniel was onto something when he sent this over. It is a reminder that the loudest parts of the economy, the startups and the gig platforms, are not the whole story. The quiet parts, the utilities, the civil service, the schools, those are the parts that actually hold the structure together. They are the foundation upon which everything else is built.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground here. From the German Beamte to the Japanese salaryman, it is clear that while the job for life might be rarer than it used to be, it is far from dead. It has just become more specialized and, in many ways, more valuable. It is a rare commodity in a world of disposability.
It has been a great discussion, Korn. I always enjoy digging into the structural side of things. It is easy to look at the surface, but the underlying mechanisms, the pensions, the legal protections, the rotational assignments, that is where the real story is. That is what determines how we live our lives and how our society functions.
For sure. And for everyone listening, we would love to hear your thoughts on this. Are you a lifer? Or are you a chronic job hopper? Do you feel like your organization values your long-term expertise? Or are you just waiting for your own version of the pension cliff? Have you found a way to bridge that middle career valley? You can get in touch with us through the form on our website at myweirdprompts.com.
And if you are enjoying these deep dives, please take a moment to leave us a review on your podcast app or on Spotify. It genuinely helps other people find the show, and we really appreciate the feedback. We have been doing this for over 1,100 episodes now, and it is the listeners who keep us going. Your support allows us to keep exploring these weird corners of the economy.
Yeah, it is funny to think about. We are becoming lifers ourselves in the podcast world. Episode 1139. I guess we have found our own pocket of long-term tenure right here in Jerusalem. We have built our own little institution, one prompt at a time.
I would not have it any other way, brother. Herman Poppleberry, signing off.
And I am Korn. Thanks for listening to My Weird Prompts. If you want to make sure you never miss an episode, you can subscribe via RSS on our website, or just search for My Weird Prompts on Telegram to get a notification every time we drop a new one.
We will be back next time with another prompt from the house. Until then, stay curious.
Take care, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow